get anxious at the thought of having conversations with people?
Yeah.
All right, we've got a few honest people. The rest of you are lying, right?
I've got the gift of gab. It depends on what
So
I'm
you've got the
talking
gift of
about.
gab. So it kind of depends on what you're talking about.
It depends on
And to some of you, Shirley,
Depends on the subject.
depends on the subject.
Depends on the person.
It always depends on the person. And maybe there's some people in your life you're just saying, we're not going there,
Yeah.
right? We're not going there. I get that. I've told you stories about my brother-in-law. We're not going there. He's since passed on, but I think I'm more mature than I used to be. I think. I hope I am. And so maybe some of those conversations would have been easier if he were still alive. But let's be honest. Some of those conversations are going to be one-sided. I think it always depends on who you're talking with. And for some, it can be reasonable. For others, just not going to be reasonable. Just not. And so maybe you don't ever get to go there with some people. I'm not talking about those conversations so much as those that maybe there's a chance that we can at least come to an understanding and have a deeper appreciation of those folks and how they might think differently than I happen to think about an issue. So maybe it's those middle conversations that we're shooting for as much as anything. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, today we're talking about war and the radical center, which is kind of where Adam Hamilton ends up in his book. And we'll dive right into this and talk a little bit about another pressing issue, a topic in our country. And some of you have more experience in terms of living through a variety of wars. Anybody here alive or remember anything from World War II? Yeah, so you do? So you got some perspective, but you couldn't have been too old. McGregor, you couldn't have been too old. I mean, you're young people, so some of you maybe remember a little bit more, but we'll talk, just the perspective of the different wars, I think, is always interesting.
But when you're 10 years old, like in 41, and then by the time the war is over, you're a teenager, I think you're seeing it from a child's point of view. And how it affected your family.
Absolutely. Well, you're hearing your parents at the breakfast table, at the dinner table. Absolutely.
And worried about your father being, there was the draft then, and so we were classified, and these notices came, and you were really concerned that your dad was going to be part of the enlistment,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or you look to see who had a star in their window all of a
Yeah.
sudden.
Oh my, yeah. I've seen the list of stars. First congregation I started in, they had a whole list of people that had died in World War II. You've seen those lists.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Small little church, and I think there was 30 names of people that had died.
We didn't see the war every day. We only saw the war when we went to the movies on Saturday and saw the
That's
movies.
true.
Yeah.
But I look at it this way, and this is one of my biases for today. We don't pay for our wars today.
Yeah.
We don't sacrifice like you did in World War II, and the sugar rations and the gasoline rations and everything else. And it's like, I think if we had to pay for our wars, at least we'd be more engaged in what's going on. That's one of my issues.
What I recall is that it affected every family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everyone was involved, and everyone felt it. And where I lived, and I lived in the country, in Minnesota here, and our neighbor boy across the road was killed in that war. Our neighbor boy a mile down the road to the south was killed in that war. And those funerals were held at our church. And I was just, I was born in 1930, so you can figure that out. But I was really deeply affected because at the funeral they just had a little square table with a tablecloth on it and a picture. And everybody was really sad because the parents didn't even have the body. It was, and my cousin was killed in the war. I mean, so there you are.
Yeah.
I mean, your family's.
It touched everybody's life.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could issue, you could argue that last week's topic, homosexuality, for a lot of us growing up in South Dakota, like that was just so long ago and far away. I don't remember any exposure to that issue, but war touched everybody, I think. It was just a part of everybody's life in one way or the other. What I want you to do at your table is make sure you know everybody at your table, and then talk about question number 1. You two, would you mind joining them over there? They look like reasonable people. So good luck with that one. So make sure you know everybody at your table. And what do you remember feeling in the months leading up to the Iraq War? Not so long ago, was it? So talk about that for a few minutes at your table. Some of your thoughts. What do you remember about the months leading up to the Iraq War? For whatever reason, that seems to stick in our minds a lot more than Afghanistan, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you remember?
9/11.
There would be a diplomatic
You were hoping for a diplomatic solution.
solution to
Okay.
it, yes.
Okay. What else do you remember?
Here.
Fear? Okay, what were you afraid of?
Weapons.
Weapons. Weapons of mass destruction, perhaps. Okay.
And also,
Chemical, biological,
yeah,
warfare.
right.
Okay, what else do you remember?
Hearing too many stories.
Too many stories. What does that mean?
Well, like Dorothy said, one day we heard all this on one side for retaliation, and on the other side we heard, let's sit down and think about this.
You weren't sure what to believe. Yeah, if there was 2 sides, there might have been 10 sides. But yeah, lots of different stories, a lot of somewhat contradictory kind of stories. Hard to know what to believe. Yeah.
Compassion
You heard compassion,
for the people over there.
all right? That somehow, let's be honest, this is not, can you imagine, we went through 9/11, and just, can you imagine living in New York City? But what would it be like to live in a country that was being invaded, if you want to call that? Shock and awe, what would it be like to go through those bombing raids? I don't think we can begin to comprehend. No,
They didn't do anything.
no, and the people
They were innocent.
The people were innocent, okay? Different kind of war. I think anytime we get into a war these days, especially in the Middle East, all the old rules are kind of out the window. So some of you have been in the military, you know what the manuals were like. I don't know how much they've changed, but it has to be a huge change in how we fight and engage the enemy. What else do you remember?
I was living in California, in San Francisco during that time, and then my daughter, my very first daughter was born right after 9/11.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of racial tension in San Francisco, and lots of people being hassled who may or may not have been of Middle Eastern descent, and lots of mosques and temples being graffitied and attacked. So it was, that's kind of what I remember is the America side of it.
Okay, so the racial tension. Would you mind talking just a little bit about your situation? Is that okay? I mean, your daughter? You mentioned your daughter.
Well, because she was born 2001, October 2001. So I remember being pregnant with her and watching 9/11 happen.
Okay, so you just
And
felt
thinking,
that.
oh my gosh, I'm bringing a daughter into the world, to the
Yeah.
United States. What's
Yeah.
happening?
Right.
Don't come out.
Well, the world isn't necessarily a friendly place. Yeah, you just feel that. Okay? Other kinds of things.
I remember being disappointed. I was sitting at my table. 9/11 happened the second day of my working career. I was hired as a youth director. I started September 10th, 2011. And we had families who had moved from Washington, D.C., who lost people in the Pentagon. And I remember right after 9/11, there was this kind of surge of unification. I think the election was so contentious. And there was this kind of spirit that, maybe we can hold together and maybe we can weather this together. And just feeling so crushed and disappointed by how it kind of played out and the divisiveness that came so quickly after this hope for kind of this united movement forward.
I talked about the same thing, just feeling that surge of patriotism felt really good for a while, and then just feeling very confused because I felt like we went
And reality set in.
Yeah, I felt like we went the wrong direction.
So, and tell me about, oh, you mean the surge of patriotism related to what?
9/11, after 9/11.
Okay.
Well, like Jason was saying, how there was just this feeling, more of a feeling of unification. And
So we have banded together, we're going to take
we're gonna
on,
weather, and everyone was so supportive and of each other, and it just seemed like.
so somehow banding together in response to something felt like one thing, but and then doing something about it, banding together, felt different.
Right.
But I was conflicted on if we were doing the right thing.
Yeah, are we doing the right thing?
And if you question, then you weren't a patriot. I think
Yeah.
that was
Yes.
that was the thing that was.
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
So
That's question number 2, by the
Okay.
way, but that's hard, it's hard. How much
Right.
can we question? We went through that with Vietnam, and how much can you question?
Oh,
Yeah. Anybody, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember Tess and I sitting comfortably watching television, the news, and watching our bombers come in over Iraq.
very.
It's like it's a TV program.
It was unbelievable. And then the first thing that came to mind were those Nazi bombers flying over Poland. I mean, I know that be unpatriotic for some to hear that, but that's what came to my mind right on. And,
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, there is that sense when you watch war on TV, you're kind of experiencing it to some extent. It's a television program. It's a reality television, the ultimate reality television program. Ellen?
That's what the kids have grown up with.
Yeah, they have. They have, and so say some more about that.
Wait, this is what they become accustomed to. They can see it happening there, and is this fiction or is this real?
Is it real? And it's the expectation, though, if it's happening in the world, we will see it, and we will experience it on TV. Which I don't even know what to make of that. It's just part of the reality of the world we live in, so, yeah.
It's like when David Bloom was in the tank and NBC was following him. I don't know if you all know who David Bloom was, the NBC correspondent who died over there, not from war wounds, but he died because of the deep vein thing. He was in this tank for so long that anyway, make a long story short, NBC followed him all the way right up to the door of Baghdad. So it was reality TV.
It is. We're watching a story unfold. David Bloom, did everybody hear that? The NBC correspondent? Yeah. Dick?
The thing that I kind of wondered about after it happened, and it made me really mad. We really got to make somebody pay for this, but we didn't really know who the enemy really was.
Yeah, that was the other.
Who is the enemy? It's not Adolf Hitler, is it?
No, and I compared it in my mind with Pearl Harbor, and we actually lost more. I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong here, but I think we lost more in New York that day than we lost in Pearl Harbor on the 7th. But I mean, it was just there was no question in everybody's mind. There's more deaths in New York were killed than Pearl Harbor. And boy, Pearl Harbor, it was just like black and white.
Right.
Seemed to be.
Yeah, I mean, we are in war. And there was no question in the whole country, I think, that we gotta man up. This one was just an ongoing discussion, and hasn't ended to this day, really. And, I mean.
It's different because we were the aggressors.
Well,
I don't.
Well, you responded in both cases,
I don't
but
think we're the aggressors. I just think that I'm not sure how you can explain it other than the fact that unfortunately it's not the last one of those things we're going to see. It's
No.
a question of how big it's going to be.
yeah. Well, hang on to that because we will get into some of that. Who is the enemy? Great question. And how do we confront them? What do we do in a world with the manuals, the old manuals thrown out, and when it's not oftentimes clear? Some of you must have struggled with the whole issue of, is this over oil? How much of this is over the Middle East? We're not in Rwanda, we're not in other places, so how much of this gets related to that Middle East situation? That certainly was something that was named. I think we struggled too with, and he alluded to it, but how much should we be involved in a preemptive kind of action into another country, into another sovereign country. And so we'll probably talk a little bit more about that too today. Question number 2, and this is a thing we got into with Vietnam, but maybe it's shown up in other wars at other times too. Some of you with perspective, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Can a person be morally opposed to a war and still be supportive of our troops and of our president? Why don't you talk about that at your table for a couple of minutes and see what you think.
Well, I just recalled, and I don't know which country it is, but I read a novel, okay. And I did one of the Scandinavian countries where you are morally opposed to war, you'll then have the opportunity to put in your time if there is a bad draft, to put in your time in some other way. So you're still very respectful of the government and of your leader, but you do not have to go off to war.
So something
So
like
it's
a conscientious objection
Yeah.
written into the policies of the country?
So it must work. They have other countries.
Okay.
It works here too. I went to a Quaker college for undergrad, and so there's a lot of people associated with that college who were of age and who did not fight, but did various supportive things.
They didn't have to sit in jail.
Yeah. They didn't sit in jail.
They didn't run off to Canada or somewhere.
No,
They did that.
they had to go through a long
Yeah,
approval
yeah, we
process.
heard that.
What college was that?
Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana.
In where?
Richmond, Indiana.
Okay, very good. Good to know. Good to know, yes.
So there was a statement out years ago, I don't remember who, what, where, but to me it makes a lot of sense. My country, right or wrong, but yet my country. And I think we've lost a lot of that. If they don't do it my way, I get mad at the government, maybe the press has led us that way, I don't know, but there used to be.
My
World War
country,
II,
right or
an
wrong.
example. My country, right or wrong, but my country.
I remember more, America, love it or leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it or leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which we're talking about right now, aren't we? Yeah, well, if you don't love everything we're doing, can you speak up? And what did we experience during Vietnam? What do you remember?
Protests a lot.
Protests.
Sit-ins and
Yeah.
college campuses.
A killing on a college campus.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And it was disturbing, alarming, questioning. Was there part of it that was good?
I can't think of it.
What's that?
I can't think of any right now.
You can't think of it right now. Yeah.
But I think one of the big issues was the draft at that time too. And
Definitely.
after the Vietnam War, the draft was not part of our.
Yeah, it would be a different discussion today too, if we had a draft.
Definitely.
And you couldn't find ways to get out of the draft.
And we knew people who went to Canada. In fact, the son of a pastor who was an objector, but went to Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, I turned 18, signed up for the draft. I had a relatively known number, I think it was in the 70s. I don't remember for sure, but and then they discontinued the draft. But I certainly had to think about it for those few months and wonder what would I do. Yeah, what would I? How hard would that be to go to Vietnam? To have a rifle in my hands, it's not. I don't think many of us grow up thinking about shooting people and fighting in a war. I mean, you have to be trained to do that. You know. Paul, you've been in the military. A number of you, Dwayne. How about the rest of you? Dick, you were in the military?
No, I wasn't.
You-
Unfortunately, I wasn't.
This Dick was. This Dick wasn't. Yeah. Anybody else? Women here? Yeah.
I wasn't in the service, but my husband was, and when it comes to talk to war, he said he would go to Canada rather than to have to go back into the war.
Okay. All right.
Never again, he said.
Never again. You know, I've certainly, as a pastor, found plenty of people that served but didn't want to talk about it. Did not want to talk about it in any way, shape, or form. I won't share this story now, but I had a conversation a while ago from somebody that went through Vietnam and didn't talk about it for years, and then eventually had a breakdown from it. And it really destroyed a part of his life for a while, his family, his marriage. He's given me permission to talk about it someday, but I won't get into the details today. Huge cost of war.
I think we found that out of these freedom fights, so many of the gentlemen and women that were in the war. Now the stories are coming out when they're doing the freedom fights out to DC.
Yeah.
But they never talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Question, we talk about, we support our troops.
Yep.
What are we saying when we say that?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. What do we mean when we say that? Yep.
Well, just a thought, having been in the military, when you're in the military, you basically kind of do what your country asks you to do. And I don't know what the term support actually means, but I think an expectation of most people in the military is that if they're doing what their country asks them to do, there ought to be an expectation that their country's behind them in some way and supports them in some way.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why are they doing that for their country?
That would really be a conflict to be in a foxhole someplace and have people arguing vociferously back home. And that's part of the struggle of this. You know, how do we, we're in a free country, people die, they shed blood and die for that free speech. And so, but yet there are times when we feel morally conflicted by a war. And so what does support mean? What are the limits of that? Paul?
I think the situation in Iraq, Afghanistan was, I think for 99% of the American people in the military was never an issue. And that was so blatant and obvious, the Afghanistan operation. But Iraq became a very different issue. And I think one of the big differences was the justification of that war, both inside and outside the military, and also in the population. But I think when you ask the question, what does it mean to support the troops? I think the bottom line for that was not to demonize the troops, as we did
in Vietnam.
With Vietnam.
Yeah.
And I think, there are a lot of other things. I know a lot of people that, there were prayers, a lot of praying, a lot of caring for those men and women that got deployed, got mobilized, that served and continue to serve. But I think there was still a major schism between saying I'll support the troops, basically meaning I'm not going to turn them into the bad guys.
Yes.
And I'll pray for them. I'll keep them as friends. I won't badmouth them. And maybe my biggest prayer is that, let's get them out of there as quickly as we can. But I don't think that can carry over automatically to the president and the national security team and the members of Congress that supported such an action. I think ultimately they are the ones who make those decisions. It's not the troops. It's the national policymakers. Yeah. And I think that's open for a whole different discussion.
Right. So, there's a lot of ways, and I really think some of our coming home ceremonies and parades and welcome is vastly different than Vietnam. I hope we learned that lesson, that we have to be different about that, and we have to make a qualitative judgment between policymakers and decision makers and those people that are serving in the trenches and putting their life on the line every day. Yeah.
Well, just a simple thing, and I think I sometimes embarrass this man here, but I walk up and I stick out my hand and I say, thank you.
Yeah.
If I see a young man, with his uniform on, we meet him coming out of a motel or wherever, and I just think we have to show these kids that we appreciate what they're doing.
Yeah, and a lot of them have been back once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times, and they didn't necessarily sign up for that either.
What are we doing for the families of those troops? From Zumbro even.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Do we have is there anybody addressing that? Do we address it?
Yeah, I don't know if any of the troops that we know about are even married. I think they have parents. we try to collect the names. We're putting the names in the bulletin on Sunday. We certainly try to be in conversation with those families, but it hasn't been a real active ministry. Maybe there's something more we could do. You know, I think we want to. We realize that those families are intimately engaged in every news story that comes out and the kind of threats and dangers that are prevalent.
Part of the problem too is that we are not affected by the war. You go back to World War II, we had rationing, we had paper drives, we collected grease, all those things. We all knew somebody that was in the war. Now, if you've got a neighbor or a friend that's in the military, you're aware of it, or maybe watching TV and it's more like watching a movie. But has Iraq affected any of us? Really?
In the same kind of way.
In that same kind of way?
No.
It's
Well, and I
over
think-
there.
And that's kind of back to Ellen's point. You know, kids grow up with this, we all kind of grow up with it, and so it's reality TV happening on an island someplace, like Survivor or something more specific in a desert, but is it real? Is it really real? Because it doesn't affect us in quite the same way, and that was my point earlier. We haven't paid for it, financially or other ways. Yeah.
I had an experience when I lived in Storm Lake, Iowa, and this is probably about 20 years ago. And on Memorial Day, some way, they had gotten a vehicle from every war. And then they had a parade downtown, and they asked veterans to ride in this parade. And there's Buena Vista College is in Storm Lake. And at the college that night, they had a banquet for all the veterans and their spouse or so on. And in the afternoon, they also showed a movie at the college, and it was free for anybody that wanted to come on, what was that terrible war in Europe? Battle of the Bulge. And I couldn't help but feel, if everyone in the United States would see that movie, they would really appreciate our country, because they know what we've gone through. Well, then that night at the banquet, they had someone that impersonated General Patton's speech. All these veterans at that banquet, the tears were just dripping. And it was emotional.
Powerful.
Very. And included my husband too.
Yeah.
It was very touching.
So let's go back just briefly, and then we need to go on. You know, Paul's comment. You know, the troops are one thing, and it's two different things between the troops and the president. So what do we do if we have questions or struggles about the morality of war, a particular war or conflict? Do we keep it to ourselves? What can we do? What should we do as a country?
I guess protest again.
Protest again? All right.
Right to your senators.
What? Right to your
Right
senators? Yeah.
Get involved politically.
Get involved politically?
There's lots of easy ways to do that now with the click of an email button.
Yeah, that's true. We can. And I think a lot of people would say that Americans tire of war, and so we have a lot to do with when troops come back, one way or the other, don't we? Anybody tired of war right now? You know? Dick?
Somebody at our table said you can vote.
Yeah, we can vote.
And prior to that, you can talk with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And see what their views are, try to influence them.
Yeah.
In preparation for voting, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when I was growing up, Memorial Days, you know, a town of 20,000, it was a big day.
Yeah.
The veterans were honored.
Decoration Day.
Decoration Day, that's what it was called. It wasn't a 3-day holiday.
Yeah.
It was always my birthday, and I could decorate Grace.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was big.
Yeah.
And here, we're large, and so there is a parade, but how many of us go? How
Yeah.
many of us come down here?
That's a moving service down there.
I'm sure it is.
Well, I think it goes back to Pastor Vern's point too. We don't pay for these wars anymore, so we don't feel the effects of them, and we don't really feel the need to honor people because we have no connection. You know, there's just not that same personal connection, and so, Memorial Day has become 3-day holiday to go get the cabin ready or
Yeah.
whatever.
And that's a
you
great
know.
thing to do.
Yeah, by the way, we're not trying to make too much of a value judgment,
No,
but the world
but I
has
think-
changed. Yeah,
Yeah.
Nancy?
I do think that our country is paying for this war. You know, look at what has happened to the bankruptcies, the foreclosures, our whole financial system just has been obliterated. Somewhat, as, you know, maybe that would have happened with or without 9/11, but certainly 9/11 made it tumble faster, I think, I'm not
Okay.
sure. But I think financially, this country is paying much more, as much or more so than we did in World War II. You know, maybe not many of us in this room, because we have a lot of blessings,
Yeah.
but there's certainly a lot of people in our country that are really hurting
Yeah.
since 9/11.
Let's go on. Question 3. And this talks a little bit about just war. If you were at Forum the last couple of Sundays, Paul Baker talked more specifically about that. He has a little handout. I could certainly make a copy if you're interested. I'm sure Paul would love to talk further about that with you, but we'll get into the Adam Hamilton part of that. The just war theory is meant to guide Christians in deciding whether or not to go to war. The theory takes seriously Jesus' command to love our enemies. At the same time, it acknowledges the reality of sin and brokenness in our world and the need to hold evil in check. The main idea behind the just war argument is this: if someone is hurting my neighbor, what is the responsible thing to do? Adam Hamilton spells out some of the criteria involved in that, and we'll just kind of go through this and see if it finds some resonance with you. My typewriter was a problem on the first one. Just cause is the first one. Just cause. I'm not responsible for my word processor. Just kidding. Tell me, let's just talk about each one of those just briefly. What would just cause mean? I mean, that seems obvious, but let's just mention it. Just cause, what do you think of?
Someone attacked us.
If someone attacks us, so it's or it's in response to. Maybe it's not just retaliation, but it's in response to. I think there's maybe a difference. What's just cause? Maybe if there's an immediate threat. You know, that was part of what you were saying, Pat Butters, about if there's chemical or biological weapons, if there are weapons of mass destruction. You know, that's Israel's thing right now with Iran, right? And when does it rise to the level of just cause? That's part of the gray in our world. We don't always know. It's not always as clear as Pearl Harbor. It isn't.
Yeah, do you wait until you get nailed before you have just cause, or do you, try to prevent?
Are you preemptive? Are you preemptive? That was the whole argument that was going on before Iraq.
In this atomic age, you may not get a chance to retaliate.
Yeah. Libya, I think we argued that there was a just cause there. What was it? Remember? And the Arab League invited us into Libya, so it felt different, didn't it? What was the just cause? Pardon?
The killing of the innocent.
Yeah, the possible killing of a slaughter of innocent civilian in Libya at that time. All right, so lawful authority, what would that be? That somehow there's been a legitimate authority that has led us into this conflict. In our country, I don't understand necessarily, but the president has oftentimes led us into conflict. But Congress is that the War Powers Act? Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the War Powers Act. I personally think it'd be better if we went back to the Congress, and because there's just more accountability there myself. But you might have a difference of opinion. But it seems like we've been in lots of conflict where we never really formally declared war. Paul?
That's the constitutional responsibility of Congress.
Yeah.
It's a separation of powers, right?
It hasn't been exercised since December 8th, 1941.
Right.
I knew somebody would have an answer here. And don't you think it should? Don't you think it should be exercised? Let's not get into that. But we could be here for a long time. But there's just a part of me that thinks we should have a healthy debate in our country before we send our troops off to wherever. Right?
Well, a good example would be if this drug struggle where 50,000 people have been murdered in Mexico and it's approaching closer and closer to our borders.
Yeah.
If that had spilled over into Texas and Arizona, which it already has to a certain extent in Arizona, at what point do we consider that a lawful purpose?
Yeah, well, good question. Yeah. Let's go on to the next one. Just intent. Sounds similar to just cause, but just intent. What do you think that might? What did Adam Hamilton say? He talked about it can't be just about revenge or seizing property or retaliation or oil, but somehow there has to be some larger sense of what this is about. North Sudan right now, Jason, you want to talk a little more about that? In South Sudan, is that just intent?
Yeah, well, independence happened in South Sudan in July of 2010, and they had negotiated that peace after 50 years of war and 5 years of kind of sorting things out, and now North Sudan is coming back over the border and creating all kinds of chaos and killings over oil predominantly, because when they were one nation, all the oil's in the south, 92% of it is in the south, and they want half the revenue from an independent nation now, and are sabotaging oil lines and all kinds of things. And South Sudan doesn't have the infrastructure. They don't have the military. So then the military's in the north. The economic engine is in the south, and it's a mess.
Yeah. And I think it was just 2011, not even 10, but 2011. Wasn't it just last July?
Yeah.
So
it was. Yeah, I'm sorry. It was,
we're worshiping.
No, it was 2010. They celebrated their year anniversary in July of 11.
So it's going to be 2 years.
Yeah.
That's before you got here.
Oh wait. When did I get here? Oh, yeah, it feels like a decade. Good decade.
Usually I'm the one with the adult brain, okay? But yeah, you're
That's
too young
true.
to have an
Yes,
adult brain.
January 2011.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just gave money for them to go to Chicago to go.
Last resort, we can probably relate to this one a little bit better. We felt some of this going, and I heard some of you alluding to this going into Iraq. What's a last resort?
Completed all other possibilities.
We have exhausted all other diplomatic means. That was one of my things with Iraq, and you can say, well, it feels like we're on the precipice of something grave and dangerous, so you can't sit around and twiddle your thumbs forever. That's the other side of it, but it's like, how much can we do? How much have we really exhausted all diplomatic means? Sometimes there's a lot of saber rattling going on between Israel and Iran. I don't think they're talking to each other at all. So has there been any diplomatic kind of efforts? We wonder about that sometimes. So last resort means that we've tried to at least talk to each other. Maybe we've had a mediator that's been set up, asked for some sort of help in the process. Reasonable hope of success, what would that look like? What does that sound like?
It's winnable.
Is it winnable?
Why start something if you can't finish it?
Okay, so why start something? Why would you send your troops into something that's
Sacrificial.
yeah, that's like suicidal almost, sacrificial? Yeah, that somehow it has to make sense in that kind of context. All right, discrimination. What does that look like? Are we discriminating between civilians and military, right? Which is harder and harder when they hole up in a mosque or there are some people in homes. Well, how do you even begin to do that? Well, they're not wearing uniforms anymore. It's hard. It would be so hard sometimes to make those decisions, and easy to sit back in the rarefied air of television and instant feedback, but yeah, it's really hard when you're in the heat of battle.
For a child.
A little bit harder in a day and age when you have drones too, isn't it? Drone attacks and proportionality. You know, somehow are our strengths matching up with their strengths? Does that work anymore? Does that?
It does. it basically means, are we using proportional, a proportional response? I don't know about you, but I would avoid using a 12-gauge shotgun to kill a fly.
Yeah.
Right? Fly swatters work very nicely.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah. Which it's hard to know when you come with a different, again, different rules of warfare these days. Shock and awe, is that proportional? Were the bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, were they proportional? Those are tricky, hard issues. So here's the question. Do you find these criteria compelling? Are they helpful to you? This is a theory that's been around for how long, Paul? How long have we been talking just war?
Well, two of the main authors in the Western tradition would be Augustine of Hippo, about 400.
Yeah.
And then Thomas Aquinas, about 1100, is more identified with fleshing it out more. But this goes back to Mesopotamia, because the whole idea that there have to be limits in some way, shape, or form on the conduct of war, and when a country goes to war, predates Christianity.
Okay.
And goes way back, so thousands of years.
Okay, thank you. So helpful, reasonable, what do you think? Compelling?
Should be compelling.
Should be.
Yeah, should be compelling.
So many things are subjective.
So many things are subjective, definitely, like the whole world. Every opinion we bring to anything is subjective, biased to some extent. Even, I'm guessing World War II, as clear as that seems looking back, had to be somewhat difficult in the middle of it. Do we get engaged? Do we not? Yeah.
Although, Vern, there's a second piece that goes with this. This is the piece of saying, do we go to war? And the second piece is the just war conduct of the war. So there are two really important pieces, because once you go to war, there's also the questions of okay, how do we actually do battle? And that's a whole different kind of step to take.
Yeah. And the blue sheet that Paul passed out at Forum, talks about before, during, and after. So, yeah. Nancy?
I have a question. When you say, how do you do battle, is that something that's negotiated with the other country you're going to go fight with?
Psychologically.
It would be if we were fighting the British, but the reality is that the rules of warfare are a product of international treaty, the Geneva Conventions, 1949 and 1922 or 4, and treaties on sea naval warfare dating back to about 1905, and modifications along the way. And combatants, non-combatants, legitimate targets, and the signatories to those, which the United States is a signatory to all of that. Usually you try, there's a degree to which we pay attention to that. The big problem is the the whole thing, for instance, dealing with Al-Qaeda, which is terrorist organizations. They're not signatories, and they're playing by a whole different set of rules. But the conventions are saying, and the Uniform Code of Military Justice for the United States, and the rules of war that we function under, have specific guidelines of how you even engage in war against a non-state. Asymmetrical warfare is what it's called. And against like Al-Qaeda, how you engage that. And there are restrictions there. We don't play by their rules. We refuse, normally we refuse to do that. And just a comment on that, you know, it perhaps the differentiation of the soldier and the non-soldier, in a sense, is when it comes to all the training of officers and senior NCOs in the military, the drumbeat always is your personal moral convictions are irrelevant. Is it legal? When a young lieutenant is trying to make a decision in a combat situation, the question is not my personal morality. It is the question of, is this action legal or illegal? And that's decided, you know, in national policy, it's decided by Congress, it's established by history and tradition and codes. And that's part of the difference of why I think we can not demonize the soldier. Because they're you know, that's their world, as over against those who are making the calls of whether the soldier goes in the first place. That's a lot to a very simple question that you asked.
Yeah, because, you know, I'm sitting here going, okay, so the superpowers negotiated those and agreed on them, is that correct?
Not just the superpowers, but historically, just about every nation state in the world, in fact, I think every nation state in the world signed on to those. Maybe Korea, North Korea. There might be just a handful, but otherwise, they've all been signed on to. And that's why I kind of jokingly said if we're fighting the British, it's not a problem. We know all the rules. It's when we're fighting in a situation where, as in Vietnam, there was most often no uniforms. In Cambodia, there were no uniforms. What do you do when a 12-year-old girl is standing in front of your tank and you become a vulnerable target all of a sudden? Do you just, you know, does the tank commander say, drive over her? Or doesn't he? If he doesn't, he's probably going to lose his tank and his crew. See, those are the horrible situations that we put our people in.
Yeah. It's helpful, Paul. Thank you. Question number 4. I want you to talk about this at your tables. You can decide, and then we'll send this off to Washington. Is our continuing presence in Afghanistan and Iraq a good thing? If you were the President of the United States, what would you do with our troops going forward? Okay? Why don't you talk about that at your table in 2 or 3 minutes and come up with a good answer?
Is there probably an element that wants us to be there?
I don't know. You mean from those countries?
Yeah.
I think that's certainly the case. You know, if we were to leave Iraq all of a sudden and it's an unstable place, things could go south very quickly. Yeah.
And do we have a responsibility to kind of finish what we started? Or
Okay, so finish what we started. That somehow it has to be part of a larger.
But on the other hand,
I'm not saying
We got a lot of that. On the other hand, yes, what?
we may not be able to finish what we started.
Exactly.
What does that even mean?
What does that mean?
What that means
Yes.
is you've got, like I said before, you've got these various Sunnis and Shiites, and I don't understand it all, but you got all these individual little worlds over there that kind of look out for themselves, so they have the capability of getting a government that'll be self-sustaining, get their economy going,
Right.
and then they will be able to do well without us.
Can they operate under a democracy at all? If they haven't had any democracy in their past, that's a valid question. Can we import democracy? As good as the system has worked for us, can it work everywhere?
No.
Okay.
Then I think it went back to the other question, was there a reasonable hope for success when it began?
I'm not sure we knew.
Yeah, was there a reasonable hope of success? It's a good question. Yeah. I don't think we understood the world of Islam as much as we are understanding it more today. I think we went in with some naivete. Yeah. I think we found out how hard nation building is. You know, it's one thing to come in and topple a dictator. It's another thing to build a country. That's hard work. Because yeah, the Sunnis and Shias have been fighting, and not everywhere, but they've been at odds for a long, long time. And it's not easy to just come in and say, we will rework this. Yeah.
And you've got Pakistan to deal with when you're talking about Afghanistan as well.
Yeah. And once again, we have a price tag that's hard. So how do we go about defending ourselves? And Paul was talking a little bit about this when the rules of engagement are so vastly different, but we have a world of radical Muslim terrorists. I mean, that seems to be one of the central issues in the Middle East, right? That's the war on terror, whatever you want to call it. But what do we do in our world, in today's world, when everything seems different? Do we need to keep fighting this war? Do we just fight it here, you know, in self-defense, or do we fight it there in some sort of offensive way? Are we involved in arming, you know, people in Afghanistan, training those people so that they can fight against the Taliban?
We talked a little bit about just the Marshall Plan after World War II and how much soft power was used to make our enemies our allies, and how lasting that has been. And I've questioned for 10 years if, you know, if we shouldn't have been more proactive and invested more in soft power, in kind of winning over the people in that way to help support infrastructure and schools and things like that. Because that, I mean, that's where there is strength with some of the terrorist groups, is that they do amazing amounts of things for the people to kind of win them over.
They
and then
feed
have
them.
this, yeah, they feed them and they provide health care for them, and they, you know, and then they have this other side that is just diabolical. And so I don't know if there's something there about soft power over kind of hard and fast war.
Yeah.
Violence.
Well, that's one of the questions. They do that, though. The Taliban, they find ways to be involved in social issues and feeding people. Yeah. Well, I think what we found is that it's incredibly complicated to be halfway around the world and try to understand it, for one thing. I think it's very hard to not turn this war, or the wars that we've been involved in something that's Christianity versus Islam. That's been harder than we think it is sometimes. And I think when we were in the class last spring about Islam and Christianity, it's one thing to say it's not a war against Islam, but it's another thing when you're the country that feels like you've been invaded, to know what to do with those feelings. And in the Arab world and the Muslim world, humiliation is a big deal. And if your country has been influenced in good and bad ways by the Western powers, and then suddenly you have the United States power that's in your country, you're going to raise up a lot of ill will just by virtue of the fact of being there. Yes, some people might want you there, you know, because there's deeper struggles, but it's very complicated to get in the middle of that and to win over the hearts of the people, and then to leave on good terms. I don't know if we know how to do that. It's so hard to do. You know, but we understand anyway. I think we understand a lot more about Islam these days, and hopefully we're growing in that part of that. I want to switch to, we got about 12 minutes to go, and want to talk a little bit about the radical center. Question 6, Adam Hamilton argues for something called the radical center. He describes it as anything but mushy or moderate or wishy-washy. It is radical in its pursuit of truth wherever it can be found. It is radical in its commitment to love. It is radical in its desire to follow Jesus Christ no matter the cost. So, you know, those pages 232 to 235, you might want to open them up. But how does Hamilton further characterize the radical center that he's been arguing for in this book? I'm sure you all remember from your good reading. What does he say? What's that radical center look like?
The best of the right and the left.
It's the best of the right and the left, okay? All right? So somehow he's been, we saw that I think most specifically in the conversation about abortion, he was trying to move those X's on the line a little bit towards the center, and then he came up with about 7 things that maybe we could agree on. Some might disagree about that, but at least he was trying, okay? What else?
Just building bridges instead
Building
of walls.
bridges instead of walls. Yeah. All right. Hard to do in our country. It's hard to do in our world. Hard to do in the Middle East.
Hard to do in our church.
Hard to do in our church. Hard to do in our families sometimes. In our own families. What else? What are some ways that he characterized the radical center? I wrote down some of them. He said that God is gracious and merciful, but yet God is what else?
Not small.
God is holy. So, graciousness would imply that God is obviously a forgiving God, willing to give us a different chance, but yet another chance, but God has expectations of our behavior and how we live in our world. So, He's asking us to hold those things in tension, and to live with that tension, to live with those polarities. Okay? What else does he say?
Searching for truth and always changing.
Okay, so he talked about searching for truth and that ongoing search for truth, but yet realizing that always changing, maybe always saying, I heard him also saying that you don't necessarily set aside historic truth just because it's a new day. You hang on to that historic truth, unless there's compelling reasons not to.
Yeah, i.e. don't forget World War II.
Yeah. Or the whole issue of slavery, I think you could liken it to that. Okay? What else?
The Bible is our anchor.
The Bible is our anchor, but yet, what was the flip side of that? The Bible is written by human beings, right?
Right.
So, it's a human book, but it's also a divine book that is our anchor. And again, I don't know if you're somebody that likes polarities or likes things when they're held in tension. You could also call them paradoxes, but yet somehow the gray is sometimes living with both, isn't it? These kind of polarities or paradoxes can drive people crazy. Lutherans can be pretty good at these things, but they can drive people crazy, can't they? Yeah, it's easier to have black and white. Let's just be honest. Just tell us the answer. Just tell us what's right, what's wrong. Let it be clear. And I think he's saying, in the best tradition of this, not always so clear. It's more gray sometimes.
I like the quote from John Wesley about that we can't think alike, maybe not love alike.
Yeah.
Not be of one heart, even if we're not of one opinion.
Yeah. Which relates to question number 7. Let's go on to that. It's that quote by Lucretia Mott, it is time that Christians were judged more by their likeness to Christ than by their notions of Christ. Where the sentiment generally admitted we should not see such tenacious adherence to what men deem opinions and doctrines of Christ, while at the same time in everyday practice exhibited anything but likeness to Christ. That's kind of the idea. This is written, what, a century ago? We've been fighting about things forever, since the first century. Can we act in more Christ-like ways in the midst of that? Can we find ways to love together? Last 2 questions, 8 and 9. How have you seen this book being helpful for you? And then what have been its weaknesses? Let's talk about the helpfulness first. How's this book been helpful?
I think in critical thinking.
Critical thinking, okay. How's it been helpful?
It helped me realize I'm great.
That you're great. It helped you realize more of who you are.
And then that's okay.
And that's okay to be great.
I mean, I've been struggling for so long with some of these issues and
Okay.
I know people on both sides, and I find myself gray, and I used to think that was
A bad
not a
thing.
good thing.
Worried that we were being wishy-washy.
Exactly, gosh, why can't I just figure this out? And I've realized that maybe I don't have to.
That you don't necessarily have to figure everything out.
Yeah.
I mean, look at how much we just struggled with the question of, what should we do with our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq? None of you jumped up and said, I've got an answer, it's pretty easy, I know what to do. Yeah. Okay? That's an interesting thing. I never was there, but I hear what you're saying. So good, what else? What's been helpful about this book?
Just talking about issues.
So just talking about it, giving voice to it in a place that was moderately safe and okay.
Yes.
Okay?
I think it reinforces the fact that that's the only way we're ever going to, you know, get along and make progress as a society or whatever, is to strive to find the gray. I mean, it'd be nice if Congress, this would be required reading for Congress, but
We'll send them a letter, send them an email.
How about send them the book?
Just send them the copy.
Send them the book.
Yeah.
535 of them.
Well, that's a thought. That's a thought. I do think that whole issue of talking, not everybody's comfortable doing it, but if we can find a safe place to be able to do that, it's got to be better than not, don't you think? Just talking to each other, trying diplomacy. Yeah, maybe it's wishful, crazy thinking for Israel and Iran to sit down at a table together. But would it be the worst thing in the world if somebody at least tried? Rather than just saying, do this or we're going to bomb you, we're going to destroy your country. Yeah, with the very bombs that you don't have, by the way, we don't think you should have, but we have.
We got it.
You know, it's like, please talk, please try to talk first. Yeah. All right, what else has been helpful? I like understanding different sides, different nuances. I don't always, I can know my side better than the other side, and I think it's just helpful to hear that, read it in print. Very important that I try to understand people that might think differently than me. Yeah.
Articulated things.
And by the way, I have to be reminded of that over and over again. It doesn't just come once and then I've got it. I know exactly. Yeah. All right, so what do you think might be a weakness or two of this book?
I think he tried too hard to find the gray in some areas.
Okay, so he tries too hard to find a gray. Yeah.
And there's some truths out there that my truth is right.
Yeah, so there are times when you wanted him to be more clear or don't be
More black and white.
maybe too timid at times. Yeah. Okay, what else? What else could be a weakness of this book?
I've seen a lot of discussion in the book and even in the class about listening to others, getting the different perspectives on a topic. And I haven't seen enough yet of, okay, now how do you work that? How do you bring that together? How do you make a resolution? How do you get to the middle? I'm missing that part of it still.
Okay. Well, we could do that under question number 9, and we could solve it all in the next 3 minutes. But, you know, that is a good question, Dick. I mean, that wasn't one of my goals for the class, is to get to that middle. But that could be a follow-up to something like this. Absolutely. Yeah, good point. What else? You know, one of my things for a weakness for this, and maybe it relates to what you just said, Dick, can we ever get to that middle? You know, one of my things with this is I'm not sure there is a middle on a lot of these things at all. And can we learn to live together anyway? And I would argue in the church especially, but in our families, individual families, can we find a center in Jesus that isn't necessarily dependent on me walking out of that door with the same opinion that you have? Because guess what? Are we ever going to get there on some of these things? I think some of these issues are going to be around till Jesus comes again. I don't see abortion ending anytime soon in terms of a thing we're fighting about, or war, struggling with how to go to war, when to go to war, with whom to go to war. Homosexuality, that's not going away anytime soon. So I don't know. You know, Dick, do you think we can get there?
Well, it'd be nice if he could. That'd be hopeful. But
Yeah,
but I don't think the book deals with how to do that. That was my only point.
Yeah.
It deals a lot with talking with each other and hearing each other out, but it doesn't really talk to the, how do you then come to the middle?
Yeah.
It makes the point that the middle might be a good place to be, but doesn't tell you how to bridge that.
Yeah. Well, in our world, and I'm no scientist, but I think our brains are sometimes even wired differently when it comes to what we're comfortable with. You know, I think there are certain people that would sign up for this class and others wouldn't. There are certain people in our culture that just that don't go there politically. Compromise is not part of their frame of reference. You know, I want to, and I think you bring up a great point, Dick. It's like, I want to be able to go there. I want us to be able to go there as a country, as a church, as people. I'm determined to keep trying, but I don't know how to always do that.
I wonder, the way to get there, if there'd be any hints from Adam, is simply to listen. That's the only way we can listen.
At least start.
Hopefully listening
At least start.
will move toward practicality in some way, moving in the direction of openness.
Yeah.
And maybe his point was just to open the door.
Yeah.
Maybe this book wasn't intended to get us there, but to get us thinking about getting there.
Yeah.
Keep moving towards it.
Yeah.
Will we ever get there? Moving towards it.
Well, if anything, I've so appreciated just hearing the different sides and realizing that, you know what, I can't demonize whatever opposing view that I have or the person who expresses that, because you know what, I care about you all. And in caring about people who have a wide variety of opinions, that actually, I feel as though that has actually moved me toward the middle, because I realize that our relationships are a whole lot more important than the opinions that we may or may not agree on are. And that's been kind of a like, wow, I really have to listen to other people. Like, you know, sometimes you're listening to the radio or you're watching TV and someone comes on that you just like, they start spouting off and you're like, I'm gonna turn it off. Well, now I'm actually tempted to listen to the other side for a little bit. I might give them 4.5. But, you know, I guess that's been something that's been helpful for me.
No, and I find myself when some of that's going on, and I certainly do try to channel change and hear lots of different opinions, read lots of different things, but I find myself wanting, could you please just stop and listen to each other?
Yeah.
You know, I want to call people, I want to invite people to listen more and feel like it's a conversation.
Get off your talking points.
Yeah.
The debates were a farce.
Say it again?
The debates were a farce. The Republican debates, they were a farce.
And why do you think so?
Well, because they just spouted what they thought. They didn't ever answer a question.
That is hard in politics.
Yeah.
It is.
They never answered
Yeah.
the question that was.
You want us to go deeper into some of those issues, and that gets back to Dick's thing. Can we ever get to that place where we're really dealing with some of the issues? Were you going to say something?
Some of the TV shows that I've flipped on from time to time, I think this issue of listening, you know, they'll start talking about a topic that I'm interested in and would like to hear both sides. And pretty soon these two people that are nationally respected are shouting at each other. And all they're doing is shouting, and you can't hear a thing.
So hard to watch.
I mean, so I think listening and listening is a big thing.
So what I want you to do, we're 5 minutes over, I apologize, but I give you 30 seconds in your head to think about one next step going forward. You don't have to share that with anybody else, but just in your head, what's one next step going